In the small town of Awka, there lived a family of three: Mr. Charles, his wife Juliana, and their daughter named Amanda. Amanda was a little girl of 7 years old. She was a pretty little girl who had a beautiful smile, but unfortunately, she never experienced the warmth of a genuine smile, not because she lacked anything, but because her own home was devoid of happiness and a hell to her existence, growing up in a household where joy was scarce. She never had the opportunity to develop a sense of true happiness that a little child of her age should enjoy. Instead, her childhood was marked by an atmosphere of sadness, which had a profound impact on her emotional well-being and confidence. It all began one day when Amanda was alone in her room. Her father, Mr. Charles, unexpectedly walked in, his presence filling the space. With an unsettling seriousness, he said, "Amanda, I want to show you what it means to be a woman." His tone was laced with an unspoken warning, as he added, "But you must promise not to tell anybody. It is a secret. Make sure you don't tell anyone." Little Amanda did not know what her father meant, but she trusted him. Of course, it was her father, and she trusted whatever her father said. Gradually, Mr. Charles started making advances to his 7-year-old little daughter. Unfortunately, this cruel act of Mr. Charles didn't stop that day, but continued afterwards and developed into a routine. Amanda would always run away, most times, but Mr. Charles would always catch her. She was deeply traumatized at just 7 years old. You must be wondering where Mrs. Juliana, her mother, had been while all these were going on. Well, stick with me in this story as it unfolds in bits. Mrs. Juliana was a successful entrepreneur and owner of the largest fabric shop in the city of Awka. Her store was a go-to destination for wholesale fabric purchases, attracting customers from all over the place. She was deeply invested in her business, often spending long hours at the shop. She rarely took notice of the events unfolding within her household. However, her dedication to her business came at a cost. Mr. Chauncey, on the other hand, was a man who had a remote job. He worked from home creating websites for companies, so he was always at home and had all the time to commit the atrocities he was committing with his daughter Amanda. One Saturday morning, Mrs. Juliana was sitting at the dining table, calculating her business transactions with her customers as usual. Of course, that is all she always cared about. Then Amanda walked up to her and said, "Mommy, why does Daddy hurt me when you are not around?" Amanda's voice was barely audible, trembling with emotion, but her mother, Juliana, remained engrossed in the stack of papers scattered across the dining table, oblivious to her daughter's distress. Mrs. Juliana, a shrewd businesswoman, was consumed by her shop affairs and finances. Her tunnel vision for her business left little room for anything else. In response to Amanda's query, she dismissively replied, "Amanda, please, not now." Her attention was still fixed on the ledger before her, with eyes scanning the numbers with unwavering focus. "Oh, can't you see that I'm busy? You know how hard I work to make sure we have enough. Just go and do your homework, all right?" Mr. Juliana added. "Sorry, but Mom," Amanda said again, her voice cracking as she stood there, clutching the hem of her shirt, desperate for someone to listen to her. "Amanda, I said I am busy," Mrs. Juliana snapped, finally looking up. Her eyes flashed with impatience. "You always bring up silly things when I'm trying to work. Go to your room and do your assignment now." Amanda swallowed hard, her words dying in her throat. She wanted to scream, to beg her mother to hear her, but she knew it was pointless. Her mother never listened and never seemed to care about anything else, including her but the shop. So Amanda turned quietly and went to her room. Her heart was heavy and begging for attention with the secret she was forced to carry alone. Meanwhile, Mr. Charles continued to sneak into Amanda's room whenever Mrs. Juliana went to the shop. He always had his way with his little daughter. Mr. Charles would instruct Amanda to keep his actions a secret, claiming he was trying to teach her what it meant to be a woman. However, little Amanda would protest, crying, "Daddy, it hurts me. I don't like it. I'm going to tell Mommy." Her father's response would be menacing. "If you tell anyone, I will beat you and you will die. Do you want to die?" Mr. Charles would question, but out of fear, innocent Amanda would say no, and she would keep it to herself. But deep down, she needed someone to talk to. She needed attention. She needed someone to express her pains and feelings to. Oh, dear little Amanda. She tries to talk to her mother, but her mother never gives her a listening ear. It was as if she was all alone in the world. Her father, who was supposed to be protecting her, was committing all of this to her, and her mother, who was supposed to be her guardian angel, was never available for her. One evening, Amanda was sitting on the staircase, crying, her eyes swollen. She had gone to her mother again, hoping and praying that this time Juliana would listen, but it had ended like all the other times. "Mom, can I talk to you? It's about Daddy," Amanda had whispered, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table where Juliana was counting her money. Juliana didn't even look up. "What is it now?" "Amanda, why are you always complaining about something?" Mrs. Juliana questioned harshly. Amanda's heart pounded in her chest, but still she muttered, "It's about what Daddy does when you are not home." He... She couldn't bring herself to say it. The words felt like they would burn her throat, and tears began to drop down on her cheek. "Amanda, I don't have time for this," Juliana said sharply, slamming the pile of cash she was counting on the table in annoyance. "Amanda, stop making up stories. Your father works hard to provide for us, and you are just trying to cause trouble, you little brat," her mother, Juliana, reprimanded. Amanda's voice cracked as she pleaded, "Mom, please." Tears streamed down her face as she begged her mother to listen. "Enough!" Juliana yelled, her patience wearing thin. "If you're not happy here, then maybe you should go live somewhere else." "Stop being so dramatic. You are just trying to get attention," she added. Amanda was turned into silence. She felt the walls of her world closed in on her. No matter how hard she tried to speak up, her mother always shut her up. No matter how much she cried, Juliana never believed her. The one person who was supposed to protect her couldn't even see her pain. The next morning, Amanda sat at the breakfast table, her eyes dull and lifeless. As usual, Mrs. Juliana was already dressed and ready for the day, her bag neatly packed with orders, receipts, and cash. "Make sure you behave today, Amanda," Juliana said, kissing her forehead absently, not even noticing the tears brimming in her daughter's eyes. "I have to leave now so I can meet up with an important client at the shop," she added. As soon as Juliana left the house, Mr. Charles's mood changed instantly. He smiled at Amanda in a way that made her skin crawl. The man was a monster hiding in plain sight. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, yet the same pattern continued. Little Amanda continued to try all she could to tell her mother again and again, but Juliana was too consumed by her business. She would always dismiss Amanda's cries for help, calling her dramatic or too sensitive. Every time Amanda tried to speak up, Juliana would say things like, "Can't you see that I am busy? You are lucky to have a roof over your head, Amanda. Stop making up stories, this little kid." Little Amanda finally gave up on complaining about her trauma in her home. She stopped trying to talk to her mother about it. She gave up on hoping that anyone would save her. Amanda withdrew into herself, becoming increasingly quiet as her laughter faded away. She has become used to the atrocities of her father with her. She has lost the joy of childhood. Her father, who was supposed to protect her, broke her instead. Her mother, who should be her best friend, has no time for her, nor does she care about her emotions. With every passing day, Amanda was dying in silence. She has completely lost the joy of a home. She was a victim of her own home. It happened that on one fateful day, Juliana returned home from work earlier than usual. Coming home at such a time of the day was something she never did. Apparently, she had forgotten an important document she was going to submit to her account manager at the bank that sunny afternoon at home. It wasn't until she got to the bank that she found out that the document wasn't in her handbag. Upon her entrance to their house, her ear couldn't process the sound she was hearing. Her eyes caught a glimpse of an unimaginable and horrific scene before her. Her eyes couldn't believe what she saw. For the first time, she realized what her daughter had been trying to tell her all along. Juliana was so angered and disappointed at the horrible sight of her husband doing the unimaginable with her little daughter. Immediately, she called the police on her husband, explaining to them the urgency of the distress call. Mr. Charlesteen knelt in shame, begging his wife not to involve the police, but Juliana was hell-bent on her decision. Her head couldn't process the horrible sight of what her husband had been doing, along with their little daughter. Just immediately, the policemen arrived in their van with heavy guns and handcuffs. Upon sighting the policemen, Mr. Charles was frightened, his body shaking seriously in quilt. His heart instantly fell into his stomach. He tried to run as a way of escape, but the hefty policeman quickly caught up with him. The police handcuffed him and pushed him towards their van in disgust. Tears dropped down from Juliana's cheeks as she watched her husband, whom she had loved dearly for years, being manhandled by the policeman for a crime she could have never imagined. Beside her was little Amanda, who felt some sense of relief that finally her mother was standing up for her and could now understand the pains and trauma she had been passing through in their own home for a very long time, but never saw any need to give her attention nor listen to her complaints. The policeman pushed Mr. Sharza into the back side of their van and drove away immediately. At the police station, Mr. Sharza was locked up in a dark and horrible police cell with the serious torture of the police weapons. After some days, he was charged to appear in court for judgment for the crime he was allegedly accused of. On the day of the court sittings, Mr. Charles was arraigned, put into the police van, and taken to the courtroom. In the courtroom were many lawyers, and the judge, beautifully dressed in the uniforms of their legal profession. The judge was seated before Mrs. Juliana, the plaintiff, her husband, Mr. Charles, the defendant, the public gallery, and the rest of the other lawyers in the courtroom. It was time for the court hearing, and Mr. Charles stood in the dock to defend Walter for the crime he was being accused of. In his defense, Mr. Charles attempted to justify his heinous actions, claiming that his wife, Mrs. Juliana, was often unavailable to him due to her busy schedule with her shop business. He alleged that he needed companionship, and that was why he sought it in the wrong place. Can you imagine the defense? Dear viewers, is that even an excuse? Anyway, find out what was going to happen to Mr. Charles in part 2 of this story. Would Charles be sentenced to jail by the court, or would he be pardoned for his crime? Well, watch out for part 2. What do you think of Mr. Charles, Mrs. Juliana, and their daughter, little Amanda? Is Mr. Charles's reasons justifiable at all? Would you blame Mrs. Juliana's dedication to her shop as the cause of his husband's crime, just as Mr. Charles mentioned in his defense? Please, leave your responses and join the conversation below in the comments section. If you enjoy watching and listening to this story, then click on that like button and subscribe to this channel now so that you can see more of my interesting stories and folktales. You can now click on the video link on your screen to watch part 2 of this story.